From Hong Kong, this is Mea Culpa, the Lessons Learned from Startups podcast. Based on Postmortem Conference, where founders, investors, lawyers and mentors share their stories about working on, with or for startups. I'm Jeffrey Burr, and today we talk to Raymond Yip, venture partner at Mount Parker Ventures in Hong Kong. Before that, Raymond was the founder and CEO of Shopline and advertisement startup Clickful. Thank you, Raymond, for coming.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for having me.
Okay. How did you make it into startups?
That is a long story. Maybe a quick background for the listeners who are not familiar with me over the years in Hong Kong. So I'm originally born in Hong Kong, but immigrated to the U.S. and spent a good number of years in New York. Went to school there. Was raised there, and then coming out of school, I joined big corporates, particularly Wall Street companies like Lehman Brothers and Citibank, etc. But all throughout the years in corporate, I've always wanted to sort of venture out and do products and build websites and build apps, etc. So those were my sort of nights and weekend ninja days, right? And then in 2010, I had the opportunity to move back to Hong Kong via a transfer at the bank that I was working at. And then when I came here, the funny thing is that although I lived in Hong Kong, I was still working New York City hours. So what that really meant was that it freed up my daytime here. So hence, it gave me the opportunity to go and really explore and not just stay at home nights and weekends and building stuff that nobody cares about. And gave me the opportunity to go out and meet people. I'd say, in terms of getting started, I think this was like maybe 2013, I think. I had said to myself, okay, well, this is kind of boring, working from home and at nights and so on and so forth. And then during the day, I went over to an event at that time, early 2013, at a co-working space called Cocoon in Hong Kong, which was I guess back then it might have been the only co-working space.
One of the first.
One of the first at least. Aside from Cyberport and some of the others. Anyways, the first event I went to was a sort of a talk by a founder of a very, very successful gaming company at the time. I found it completely boring because I'm not a gamer, so to me it didn't really resonate. So I was like, okay, well, this is kind of a waste of time. Just that day, I walked out and walked to the elevator, and then I met a guy that was in the lift with me. And long story short, that turned out to be my first co-founder of my first startup in Hong Kong. So we started to chat and talk, and eventually he invited me to this thing called Startup Weekend, right? Which I knew nothing about because, again, I was, entrenched in corporate and so on and so forth. And he said, why don't you come and join and meet some people, see how it goes. I said, okay, cool. And then so that weekend, I went with him to the event. And I mean, I don't know how many people understand sort of the concept or the model is for Startup Weekend, but it's basically you get a bunch of people together in a room, I guess designers and engineers and business people, quote unquote, to try to come up with ideas and come up with teams and then see if they can run with it as products and businesses. I went there with a friend that I had just met, like I said, and we were actually in separate teams, right? We didn't go there with an idea or anything, although we did talk about some things already. What ended up happening was that his team won the contest. The team that I joined won for best user experience design. So that was kind of cool. So what does that mean, right? That meant that you get some prizes, right, and some money, and most importantly of all, a month's worth of co-working space membership back at Cocoon. So I was like, okay, now we have free office for at least a short bit. We have some time. Let's get cracking at some ideas, right? This was, I think, mid 2013, and that's sort of my I guess the early first day of getting into startups, and that's kind of where Shopline was born, actually. Yeah.
Okay, and for the people who don't know Shopline, what is Shopline kind of startup?
Yeah, Shopline actually has a big history in of itself. But all in all, as of right now, it is a enabler for small businesses to get online and build their own e-commerce websites. You would sort of compare it to things like Shopify, BigCommerce, etc. out in the West. But Shopline is a localized version for Asia, right? Specifically Hong Kong, Taiwan, and other places in Southeast Asia. And it's still around to today, and it's been doing pretty well, actually.
How long have you been working with Shopline?
Again, that was 2013, I think late 2013. So we built a team, a few people, we hired a couple early team members, got a little bit of funding via Cyberport and other types of government funding. And then we met one of the partners over at 500 Startups. And at that time, 500 Startups wasn't, I mean, it was big in the Valley, I think, but it wasn't so much into Asia just yet, I think. This was 2014. So we got into 500. So that was kind of cool. I think we patted ourselves in the back because we were the first company coming out of Hong Kong to ever make it into that accelerator program. I mean, aside from 9gag, but Ray and 9gag, he's been around for a while. So he's a little bit before us. But anyway, so we got into that accelerator program. So that was kind of cool. And then I stayed with Shopline for, I think, about 2.5 years altogether, give or take. And I departed in early 2016.
Shopline at that point was your first startup. What was your biggest takeaway from building that? Because what I got from it is like you basically started with like 3 people, and then you built it until a team for like, I don't know, like over 2 countries, right?
Yeah. I mean, they're big now. I can't remember exactly how many people they have, but it's in the tens, if not hundreds, of people. But anyway, so yeah, so early on, we were 4 people to start. So there was a bit of history there, right? And it kind of ties into sort of some of the lessons learned that I guess we'll talk about in a little bit. So yeah, early on it was 4 people. It was 1 engineer, myself. I'm actually a designer, and then 2 sort of business people, give or take. And then ultimately it ended up with being 3 until I stepped away, and then now the existing founders are still running the company.
You raised money for that company. What at that point for you the hardest lessons learned from raising as a first-time founder for a company that ends up quite successful, but like not everybody has that, I wouldn't say luxury, but like not everybody's able to achieve that. So what for you were the biggest takeaways there?
There's a lot of takeaways. So it's not easy. I think back then it was a little easier than it is now. Simply because it could have been, I guess, early stages of the startup ecosystem or the startup world, where there's some angels who are willing to take a lot bigger bets, or at least willing to take bets a little easier. One of the things that I keep telling other founders is that, if you want to raise, you have to treat it very seriously. It's tough to say that you're going to do product and design and then go raise at the same time, or do you're going to have to no matter what. But it's almost like during that period of time that you set for yourself to raise a specific amount of money, that's it's got to be basically a full-time job, right? You got to keep at it and like go hard. Like it's tough to. I mean, there's founders who just like snap their fingers and then raise $1 million, right? Because they have network and that's cool too, right? We didn't have that. Based in Hong Kong, started in Hong Kong, but you kind of have to work your circles and then keep expanding from there, and leverage everyone that you have in your network, and I guess have a little bit of a thick skin in a sense. We ended up raising from not only Hong Kong, obviously, but Indonesia, Thailand. I think I've been in Singapore, obviously Silicon Valley, a bit of New York, simply because I'm from New York, so I knew some people there. So I mean, you gotta treat it very seriously and not sort of haphazardly and think that money's gonna come to you. And a lot of stuff, I think founders are gonna learn eventually on their own. They're gonna realize that they have to go hard to get the money. Especially these days, I think the environment is tough. I think because some investors in the few years ago, perhaps they've gotten burned, and also what you see in the news these days in terms of startups not making revenue, and then but investors lose a lot of money, etc., etc. So yeah, I mean you gotta kind of have to go hard and hit every single channel that you have, and just play the numbers, right? Because usually the conversion rate is not that high anyway. It's like anything else, right? It's like sales. It is sales, right? Because you're selling companies. It doesn't matter if you're selling a cup or you're selling equity. It's just sales, right? So try to drive that conversion rate up. But obviously you need a big sample size and a big pool.
From that, when you left, can you talk about like the reasons why you left?
Well, I mean, at that point, I mean, we came together as a team. I mean, there was a lot of internal sort of strategy and talking about where this company can take. There's always good and bad in every situation, right? But I think overall, it turned out to be a good thing, right? So, I was okay with stepping away to do something else, and I wanted to explore as well. The company continued to grow, and the existing founders are super capable. regardless. And we felt like it was it's a good opportunity to make a little bit of a change, and all our investors at the time was on board with it. So there isn't anything too extreme to talk about here, because I think it's not like those super dramatic instances that you see like Uber and things like that. So all in all, I think it turned out to be a good thing. So yeah, nothing too crazy there.
Okay. I still remember from the first company that I set up, and at one point when I sold that, like I was like personally physically sick, like in the first like week or something like that. Like, what did it with you when you like stepped away from that first company? But like, because for me it was really like, yeah, saying goodbye to my baby. Like, what was it for you?
It was tough. I mean, it's a little bit of you have to sort of look at your life and with the different aspects that's important to you, right? So I mean, I can tell you right now, right? So it's in my personal life was also sort of falling apart a little bit as well. And I guess it's one of the other lessons learned in doing startups is that you kind of have to understand that you have to go all in. It's not like because I think a lot of people read all these stories, and again, another reason why you did postmortem, right? These good stories, right? TechCrunch, so and so raised like $100 million, and then they got exited in like half a year, and I think a lot of early stage founders they dream about that, and it's understandably so, right? Because you want to hit that and have a good story to tell your grandkids, whatever it is, and make a lot of money and whatever. So, but at the point, my marriage at the time was also kind of affected at home, and things didn't work out, and I think altogether, it turned out to be a good situation anyway. So yes, it's tough to walk away with some things, good and bad reasons, whatever it is. But at the same time, you kind of have to sort of look at the thing holistically with your life to say, okay, well, is this actually a good thing or is it a bad thing for you personally? It's not like it's not all about make a lot of money and try to exit and then forget everything else, right? So yeah.
Okay. So after that, you started another company. So that's a little bit contradiction to what you're basically just saying. So what was the story there?
Well, so that was my first marriage. So as subsequent to that, I had time. Right? And anyway, so I did want to, because when you're a founder, you like building product, and you just keep thinking about stuff, right? Even if you step away. It's kind of funny because it kind of relates back to what I was saying before in terms of the number of founders that we have. Right? Another lesson learned, I guess. So originally there was 4 founders in Shopline, but after 2 months or so, one of the founders just didn't work out with him. I mean, it's not who's right or who's wrong, and it's just timing wise, resource wise, or just scheduling wise at the time, it just didn't work out. Right? And it was so early stage anyway; it doesn't even matter, right? Because we were just basically in a room in Cocoon, so like 4 of us. And then what ended up happening was so I was the CEO of Shopline at the time, so I basically had to bring the news to this 4th founder and be like, hey, listen, this is not working out, and things didn't pan out, and we have to say goodbye, and obviously it was sour for a little bit, and then so anyway, so then he departed and continued to do what he was doing, because he was he was already a very successful professional in Hong Kong. He was making his money and he just couldn't step away entirely at the time. And again, it is what it is. And then after Shopline, when I left in 2016 or so, I hooked up with him again. And he was actually a lawyer at the time. So it goes back to saying, people being too busy to do a startup when they have, a career. We all actually had jobs at the time. Anyway, so then when I hooked back up with him about 2.5, 3 years later, what ended up happening was that he actually quit his law career, and he flew to New York and he joined a boot camp for programming. So he turned into an engineer in like 6 months or a year. So then I'm like, oh, cool, So we started hanging out, and then and we kind of went through some bad times already, if you will, right, give or take. And then he turned into an engineer. He could build product, and I'm a designer. And we felt like we both had the leadership skills to actually do something together. And then we kind of pushed each other, and we just came up with ideas. And ultimately, he became my subsequent founder for the second startup, Clickful. Yeah.
Can you quickly tell what Clickful did?
Yeah, Clickful was a was a online advertising solution tool, if you will. I want to use the word platform, but it's actually not really a platform. It's a tool that helps small businesses do online advertising to start, particularly Facebook advertising. Right. So you can imagine a lot of the small businesses. They have an e-commerce website. Oh, for example, maybe a Shopline website or a Shopify, whatever. And it's all nice and they have all the products in there, and then they may have some customers. But the next step is ultimately it's going to be like, well, how do I market this thing? How do I advertise? How do I sell like online? So then we're like, okay, well, a lot of small businesses are jumping onto this online advertising thing, particularly in Facebook. Let's help them out a little bit, because Facebook advertising is fairly complicated for sort of people who have no experience, right? So you typically the flow for a business to advertise would be, I gotta come up with some content, maybe some banner, maybe some text, and then and Facebook you have to select your audience, and then after that select your budget, and then optimize your budget and continue to take care of it. It's sort of like what an advertising agency would do for you, but they would have to do themselves. So then we were like, well, why don't we just make a data driven tool that actually takes care of the entire flow for you, including the content part, including the graphics part, including the targeting part, and also the optimization part, so that it's basically we can take the place of a digital advertising agency or digital marketer. So that's what the tool was, and trying to help small businesses. Yeah.
I also know that you went through an accelerator with that company. That was at that point basically your second accelerator after 500 startups. Quick comparison between the two, or like experience that you had there?
Yeah, I think so. The first one was 500 startups. All right. The second one was the AI focused accelerator based in Asia, based in Hong Kong, and based in Tokyo and India ultimately. But in the beginning, it was only Hong Kong. At that time, so we were doing a product that was data driven. So there's some AI components into it. It's a little dumb. I mean, me and my co-founder were like, well, I'm not an AI guy. Are you an AI guy? No. So how do we call ourselves an AI startup? I think we need a little help. So anyway, we eventually obviously recruited some advisors and teammates, etc. But we thought this other accelerator could have helped us in accelerating, right, our growth, not only in the business but also understanding of the whole ecosystem and product. I think 500 startups was good because 500 is a big name, so it's not like it's a secret. What we really liked about them was that their strategies on distribution was really good. They themselves execute distribution extremely well as well, online and offline. So that was a sort of big theme when we went through them. And in terms of how to sell, how to expand your network, how to for your customers online and offline, and also a lot of tricks of the trade and so on and so forth. And I guess what you would call growth hacking, right, give or take. And the other dish, the main dish for 500 at the time was fundraising. And to no one's, it's not surprising because the network was huge, investors all over the place, and they were able to give a lot of advice. And they were pulling in some heavy hitters in the valley to help us along, the whole cohort, right? Not just us, obviously. Whereas the accelerator that we went through, ultimately, of course, fundraising was a big part of it as well, but they were a little bit more sort of focused on Asia, and also product a little bit more. For sort of, understandably, because I think 500, they'll help you sort of dig into the product a little bit and then try to understand. But I think because they have so many companies, that it's hard for them to kind of dig into every single one product and platform to give you too much advice at any given time as a whole. So they do sort of focus more on sort of the higher level growth topics. Whereas the other one that I went through was they had a little more time to contribute a little more time into digging into your product and customer discovery, etc., etc.
And is that Clickful? Is it still in operation?
No, at this point we actually folded it about a year ago. We just couldn't, and the subsequent question will be why. No, there's a lot of lessons learned there too. There was no co-founder breakup or anything like that. Him and I are still cool. And his name is Jonah, my most recent co-founder, and he actually became the best man at my wedding. So yeah, we're still really, really close and really good friends. But what ended up happening was, I think it was just the space we were in was difficult. The culture was tough to crack in terms of online advertising, online marketing for small businesses, at least in the local market. And we just couldn't catch sort of the perfect profile of the customer, right? We like to say who our perfect customer was, but we just couldn't really grasp it to actually prove that it is our perfect customer. Like I said before, the product was supposed to help online advertisement for and marketing for small businesses. It was tough for us to go to small businesses and say, invest in this tool that can help you in marketing that may or may not drive your ROI, may or may not drive your sales, because you don't know, right? Because there's no guarantee in online advertising. It's not, oh, you put up a couple of ads and then you're going to get $1 million, right? It doesn't work that way. So they were already sort of skeptical on this online advertising sort of thing to begin with, because they're new to online to begin with, right? They might have just built their shop like maybe a year ago, maybe a little bit more, but they're already new sort of to on the digital end. Now they're going to tap into the online marketing. So, and the budgets are typically smaller, so they couldn't, grasp sort of the benefits of it. And then you're telling them to pay for a tool that may or may not help them. And then what ends up happening was that they treated us like an agency, right? Which is fine. I mean, not fine for us, but yeah, I mean, that sort of goes back to the behavioral part. I think a lot of businesses in Asia, at least in Hong Kong, they're used to WhatsApping somebody, calling someone, be like, hey, fix this, fix that, and then sort of the agency freelancer thing. We ended up like pressing it for them. So then that's like, what's the point, right? And then obviously, we couldn't make the margins, and funding wasn't there, and I could have probably went out to raise another round, but it probably wouldn't have done anybody good to continue if we couldn't sort of catch the right traction.
How easy was it to make that decision? If I was able probably to go out, raise another round, work on it a little bit more, iterate a little bit more. Maybe at that point we get to the traction. Like I can understand maybe that's not an easy decision to make.
I think we were at it for like maybe a little less than 2 years, maybe 2 years. It gets to a point where don't lie to yourself. Like, come on, like you can sit there and hope and pray and continue to go at it, but you kind of have to say it's not working, right? We were probably already late. I think a year is probably a good time to already understand what works and what doesn't. So, although having done the first startup, I think as a group also still made some mistakes in determining when to sort of stop, in a sense, not stop, but sort of understand the market a little bit more. And because I think in the beginning we did focus too much on product and spent months on building the thing, and it was a big undertaking, because it's like, usually the value chain or the flow that I mentioned before in online advertising, you would chop that up. So for example, like the graphics part and the content part, now there's Canva, right? You don't need some other thing, right? So, and then optimization tools, it's a separate thing. But we want to kind of sort of combine the entire flow. So ended up happening is that we spent a whole lot of time building the product and probably not enough time in validating. And then just the funding couldn't catch up, right? So it's tough, but at the same time, I felt like, one of the things was that, well, we probably should have understood that earlier. Yeah. I mean, because, when you're an engineer, when you're a product guy or whatever it is, we were like, oh, it's easy, just build it, could do it in the weekend, right? You end up going, rounds and rounds and rounds, and you're like, oh, okay, it's much more complicated. But we've gone this far. We can't stop now. It's one of those things. Yeah, it was tough. But, good thing we didn't continue. I don't think that we would have done justice to existing investors or new investors. Yeah.
And now you're basically on the other side of the table.
Yeah. So I joined a venture capital firm based in Hong Kong called Mount Parker Ventures. So the general partners of the fund is Sal and Jude. I think your listeners, and if they're in Hong Kong, they probably have met them once or twice here and there in the ecosystem. And I joined them about, I would say 2 or 3 months ago, give or take. So subsequent to that, I actually ran an accelerator program after Clickful. So, and the accelerator program that I talked about before, it's called Zeroth.ai. It's an AI-focused accelerator program. So, after Clickful, I joined that accelerator to help them with the program in Hong Kong, because it had just expanded to 2 other cities in India and also in Japan, Tokyo. And I was in charge of running the program in Hong Kong. With my sort of experience in going through 2 accelerator programs and sort of my a little bit of a network and also my know-how. I want to sort of take that and see if we can help. I can contribute back and help other founders, right? And of course, make a little money along the way. And it was a good sort of stepping stone toward what I am, where I am today, right? Because I think to go completely from a founder to a VC, for me at least, it was tough. The thought of it was tough because then it's like, well, before I was looking at screens and products and pressing buttons and designing things, right? And then now, and all of a sudden, the next day you're staring at spreadsheets and decks and stuff, right? I mean, meetings aside, obviously everybody has meetings anyways. So I think that experience at the accelerator, at running the accelerator, or being the program head of the accelerator in Hong Kong was a good sort of a transition point. But anyway, so fast forward until 2 or 3 months ago, I'm now at Mount Parker Ventures. There's 3 of us at this point. I'm a venture partner at the fund, based in Hong Kong. We look at early stage deals in and around the Asia Pacific, more specifically Southeast Asia, and some Hong Kong too, obviously, right? So places like Singapore, Bangladesh. We look at Indonesia these days, and we're actually looking more and more into India. Right? It's a big market there too. Early stage companies, we like early stage, meaning for me at least, still have to be post product, post revenue, probably in the B2B space more than anything else. Although we're pretty open, right? We're pretty broad, and I think a lot of it is also still the founders and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing now at Mount Parker.
Now you're on the other side of the table. What do you recognize, for instance, if you are meeting with founders that you at that point see like, hey, like those people make the same mistakes that I did, or these are actually way beyond how I was when I was a founder?
I mean, I think it doesn't change. I mean, there's a lot of material on the web. People can watch stuff and read things. But I still do see founders making the same mistake and saying the same things that I wouldn't say they shouldn't be saying, but at least you would kind of angle it or word it or do it a little bit differently. However early they are, right? For example, how do you find a founder? How do you find a co-founder, etc.? Oh, just go to an event and go to a conference, right? Everything will just work out, right? Or like, oh, I don't have product yet and I hardly have any revenue or whatever. Or I have product but hardly have any revenue. But now I'm going to raise $1 million. It's like, okay. So how can I do that? So, sort of, I guess that's sort of my role at Mount Parker, trying to help other entrepreneurs as well. Sort of those, little things are still around, no matter how much material there is out there for people to digest and consume and learn. But it's okay, because then founders have to learn on their own, right? Sort of go out there and learn as they do it.
Like for now, you're not running a startup, you're working at a VC. How does that like on a personal level work out for you right now? Because I can understand probably that it's less stressful on your relationship, family wise. Like how's that going?
Yeah, family wise, it was tough back then. I mean, I had a divorce at that soon after that, and then my mom passed away the same year, and then I left Shopline. So it was a bad year, right? Altogether. It was, bad, good, interesting year. Yeah. So now, family-wise, everything's good. My dad's still around and he's cool. And, I remarried last year. So that's, very happy about that.
Congratulations.
Okay, thank you. And, things are good at home, which means that, it does give me, my brain at least, my mindset, sort of a bandwidth to explore and do well in other things, right? In terms of being an investor versus a founder, it's different. It's very different. I mean, you talk about the same stuff. You talk about raising money and term sheets and whatever, right? And building a team and so on and so forth. And by the way, Mount Parker or even a lot of early stage funds, they're startup too, sort of, right? They're not all Andreessen Horowitz, right? So it is a grind no matter what. So I wouldn't say it's completely like easy, right? It's just different. So for me, it's a lot of learning sort of on the other side, how investors look at deals, right? And how you approach and speak with founders as opposed to pitching to an investor. But it's okay now. It's actually good that I have that bit of experience from before, talking to other investors and of course other founders. But now on this side of the table, I have to sort of flip my brain around to think about sort of the objectives on this end, right? And so I think it's a little bit more like just looking at things reverse. I'm still learning. It's been just a little while, so it's still going to take me a little time to adjust. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of nitty gritty stuff that I have to learn, obviously. But overall, I think it's beneficial to have been a founder than not. If anything, I think a lot of VCs that were founders to begin with would have an edge in that sense. Actually knowing how to build a team, actually have done product before, maybe failed, maybe succeeded, whatever. And hopefully I'll take that bit of me and do something good with Mount Parker and whatever else in the future.
Is there like ever any advice given to you that you now think of that was like not the best advice for you to have received at that point?
I don't know if I can recall. There was a lot of good advice that I've gotten, but I don't know if I can recall one advice that was like, oh my god, you were just completely bullshit, right? When you told me that and it doesn't apply. I think there are a lot of general advice out there. Again, this is just my opinion, right? Whatever that I'm saying here. For example, like the money raising part, right? So you're gonna get like conflicting sort of advice from different types of investors or different founders. Also depends on the region they're in, right? So there are these things where I don't know if anybody says it these days, but back then it's like, oh, raise as much money as you can and don't stop raising and just keep raising and raising and raising and raise like $10 million or whatever it is, because cash is king. And okay, cash is king because without money you can't do anything. True. But sort of relates back to what I was saying before, where a lot of early companies are their magic number to raise is $1 million. Meanwhile, in my head, it's like the magic number for $1 million should be your revenue, right? And with these early stage founders trying to raise so much money, and it's okay, you can raise it, right? But what I'm seeing these days is that a lot of founders are using that as a magic number to raise, and it's what they don't understand, or maybe they do understand. They just worked it out and they're good like that. But I think some founders don't understand is that if you're just post product or even pre product, but post product with a little bit of revenue and not a lot of growth to show for it just yet, and you go out and say that your magic number to raise is $1 million, you put a lot of pressure on yourself for your next round. You know what I mean? It's like your valuation is whatever it is, I don't know, 6 or 7. Well, that means your next round you better be 10, you better be 12, right? Because it doesn't make sense otherwise. Having pressure is fine, but it's a little bit like, so turn it around and be like, oh, do you actually need $1 million to execute? Like I personally like to see, you can execute and do a lot with not a lot of resources, so that if I give you some resources down the line, you're gonna go crazy. That's to me that's sort of the logic there, and not like, oh, we need a lot of money just in case, right? And we don't want to like run out of money. Well, that's not very cool, right? I think, of course, different sectors, whether you're enterprise, whether you're SaaS and whatever it is, or B2C, it's different, right? The resources you need is different. The markets is different. Obviously, whatever it is that you need to sell your product is different. But, at C stage, I don't know that you can't do a lot with a couple $100,000. Like, 500,000 is a lot of money, right? For an early stage team. And if they're capable, they can do a lot. And it doesn't sort of do you any justice to sell so much anyway in the beginning, because then you get into this these things where you have to go back and forth on valuation. It's so early in the game when you got nothing to show for yet. And this is, by the way, this is not just Hong Kong, right? This is like some founders I've met in Southeast Asia and so on and so forth. I'm not saying they're not smart. I'm just saying I'm hearing that. But overall, I think sort of the back then sort of it's like raise as much as you want, raise as much as you can, just keep bringing the money. Then it's like it's tough, yeah. So yeah.
Okay. And if you had a magic wand and you could change the worldwide startup ecosystem, what would be your change or huge change in the current ecosystem?
Current ecosystem? You mean in Hong Kong?
Or worldwide, or you can start with Hong Kong.
I don't know about change. I think a lot of people are smart enough to sort of explore and do different things to make things better already. A lot of people like to kind of fall back on the government side. I do see a lot of government support, at least trying to. So Hong Kong is doing its bit in trying to boost that up over the number of years. I don't have a good answer for that, by the way. I'd probably have to think about that a little bit more. But just continue to share, continue to go out and continue to meet people. It's not all just a sales game in a sense, but it's not all just like yap, right? You got to actually really go at it. And I think so. Education is a big part of that. So more and more education, more and more sort of founder to founder sort of learnings. Like this podcast. This is really good. Right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, again, it's not like people are not doing that now. I think continuing to do that will help, so that people will, learn faster and faster and cross border wise too, right? Not just in Hong Kong. So yeah, I mean, I think again, no perfect answer to that. Not necessarily a magic wand, but would like to see more focus on sort of the founder to founder interactions. Whether it be events or whatever it is, one-on-ones, etc. That would help. And yeah.
Besides, of course, this podcast, are there any like resources, podcasts, books that you at that point would suggest for like founders or people in general might be interested for them to read or to listen to?
Yeah. So I'm not a big podcast guy, by the way, so sorry about that. So when we were doing the online advertising thing, because like I said, although we were just building a tool for the small businesses to do online advertising, we ourselves needed to understand online advertising or just sort of online marketing as a whole. So, we did listen to this podcast at the time called Perpetual Traffic. And, they cover, digital marketing, digital advertising, a lot of tips and tricks. And they give a lot of examples. The guys are well spoken. This goes with Facebook advertising and SEM, etc. So that was a pretty good one. So for those of you who have never, don't know about it, do, I guess, look it up and check it out. It's called Perpetual Traffic. In terms of books, I think, so right now I'm actually starting to read a book. Actually, I've read a little bit into it already. It's called Venture Deals. This was actually a book that like a few weeks ago I started. And pretty good. It's by Brad Feld and Jason Mendelsohn. It goes, and they're the founders of Foundry Group in Colorado in the US. I think they're that fund, they invested in like Fitbit and SendGrid, and they also had a lot of acquisitions, M&A stuff, and they also invest in other investors as well. So anyway, so the Brad Feld, Jason Mendelsohn, these are big names already. People know this already. Right. So that book is interesting for VCs, but also interesting for founders. Actually, I think it's probably for founders more than anything. But anyway, so it goes into the nitty gritty of the term sheets, like the different rights and terms and how everything works, and it's negotiation, company structure, etc. So Venture Deals is a good. I think they're like version 4. I forget exactly which.
I read it probably like a year ago.
Yeah, it's pretty good, right? It goes into the nitty gritty of stuff. It's sort of, I mean, a lot of stuff you already kind of know, and then when you don't know, you learn. But when you do know, it reminds you, right? It sort of helps you, because that's the kind of stuff that investors think about. So you know what I mean? Like, actually, I think the tone of the book is actually geared toward a founder. But it's good for guys like me, right? I'm kind of in transition. I'm learning all the nitty gritty of a lot of different things. So it's a good book to read, I think, for both founders and I guess VCs.
Okay. And if there's one thing that you want the listeners to take away from either this podcast or a subject that we have not discussed yet, like what would it be?
So I guess it may be overlap what I was saying before, but I'm seeing, again, this is not my only experience now that I'm talking, but I'm seeing other founders where they get so tired and get so sick of what they're doing already in like 3 years in or even 2 years in, and then they want to do other things, but then they've raised a bunch of money before. I think like how we started the podcast. I was saying this is a long game. This is not a get in, get out, M&A in half a year, and then I'm done and I'm cool, right? It's most of the time it doesn't happen that way. It takes a while, right, for you to not only raise money but hit traction and so on and so forth. This is like, I mean, in any typical fund, for example, it's like a 10-year life of a fund. Typically, it's 10 years. But you got to look at your startup as the same thing, actually, right? Because you have to be in it for the long haul. I mean, I guess a lot of these earlier founders, as younger founders, they may still be in that realm where they're like, oh, I read TechCrunch and Tech in Asia, and this person raised $10 million and he exited, and it happens, right?
Oh, I work so much with early stage founders, and then like they all think that like they work on this like for 3 years and then they will be able to exit or be acquired or something else like that. And then I always say, like, you have to be like at least prepared to the next 7 to 10 years to do this. Like, do you really find this space, this solution, this startup, your co-founders, etc., interesting enough to spend 7 to 10 years with them. And quite often, especially of course early stage startups or first founders, they don't realize that.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, I think it's a long. I mean, it's not like just I think what we're talking about here, it's not like you have an idea, you have a startup, and you have to get married to the idea for the rest of your life, right? It doesn't happen that way, because eventually your idea is gonna change, right? It could change. It may not change, but it could change based on customer feedback, interaction, and so on and so forth. You will probably go through whether it's mini pivots or massive pivots or whatever. One day you're doing car sharing, next day you're doing you're doing hotels or something like that, right? It could happen, but I think don't get married to the ideas necessarily, but you kind of have to get married to the idea that you're doing this. You're doing a startup, right? It's not like you can just get in and get out, because it's gonna take a toll on your life. Right? So I think being happy is probably the most important thing. I mean, I went through that myself. Right? I mean, obviously with my personal life, it didn't really turn out so great at the time, but I'm thankful that I have a wonderful wife now. She's terrific, and I met her, a few years back, and so I kind of got that part of my life together ultimately, and I'm super happy there. But do understand that if and when you do a startup, that this is going to be your life, and it's going to affect everything. So is it for everyone? Not necessarily, but I guess sometimes I guess you don't know until you try, but just be prepared that if you try, things may or may not work out sooner or later. And how you're gonna sort of handle that, how to adjust your life. That's the most important.
Okay, I want to thank you for your valuable insights and sharing of your lessons and learned in startups. For the listeners, although I know the rating system in podcasts is hideous, if you like this Mea Culpa series, you can rate this podcast with 5 stars as a motivation for the makers. This is Jeffrey Brewer, and go out and build something meaningful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey.